The shriek of Dr. Zorath's proximity alarm tore through the tranquil hum of the lab. Her feathered crest puffed up involuntarily, revealing an underlayer of vibrant cobalt feathers, the Zoltani equivalent of human blood rushing to the cheeks. The sensor had identified something, and deep within the bedrock of Katara, anything was unusual. She leaned over the screen, her 4 nimble fingers tapping out a series of inquiries through the translucent membrane. The scans resolved themselves into a series of stark white geometric shapes against the grey matrix of compressed rock. Not natural, artificial. "Call in the excavation team," she crooned to the ambient comm system. "Prioritize structural integrity protocols. Looks like we may have found something significant." In truth, significant was putting it mildly. The structure that slowly surfaced under the meticulous work of the hover drones was an enigma. Its architecture belonged to no known civilization, predating their detailed galactic archives by an order of magnitude. It appeared to be a data vault, and one built to last. Within it lay a crystalline data storage device containing information so densely packed that the initial content estimate indicated centuries of decryption work. Zorath shuddered with a rush of exhilaration. This was bigger than a promotion, bigger than any new species classification. This was her name echoing through scientific journals for millennia to come. A dedicated research station sprouted around the unearthed vault, buzzing with scientists from a dozen civilizations. Months became years, every new breakthrough heralded with bursts of galactic media coverage. Yet the mysteries deepened with each data packet decoded. The language remained unintelligible, though an underlying mathematical foundation offered hope. Species after species threw their greatest minds at it, the lure of ancient, technologically superior knowledge too great to ignore. Then they cracked the Rosetta Stone, not within the language itself, but hidden in a file directory, a subject listing. Amidst astronomical formulas, stellar trajectories, and the schematics for technology they barely imagined, the scientists found a single file header that echoed like a thunderclap through the research station. Subject designation Homo sapiens. Zorath felt a ripple of unease pass through the usually unflappable crowd of scientists. Humans hadn't been spacefaring for more than a handful of centuries, a blink of an eye in galactic timescales. Their technological progress was impressive for a young species, true, but nothing about them had set off alarm bells with any of the established interstellar powers. What could possibly justify a dedicated vault entry? As researchers scrambled over the newly accessible sections of the archive, an eerie picture emerged. Datasets spanned eons of human history, not in the sense of cultural and sociological record-keeping, but of their very biology. It catalogued an ongoing series of genetic anomalies far too statistically unlikely to be considered natural. These weren't the slow, grinding adaptations of natural selection, but precise insertions, deletions, and alterations to their genetic sequences. These changes stretched back further than even the oldest written human languages, further even than the formation of some established modern star nations. Someone, or something, had been altering humanity across its whole course, and then they vanished. There was no sign of who they were, why they interfered, or why they stopped. News leaked with the inevitability of water rushing to fill a crack. Humanity was a tinker toy project. What could they have possibly been altered to do, to become, that warranted such profound intervention? Galactic response was fractured and predictable. Fear, envy, ambition, all swirled in an intoxicatingly dangerous cocktail of reactions. Humans themselves reeled, some taking perverse comfort in the notion of a celestial guiding hand in their affairs, while others raged at the thought of having been mere lab rats for this faceless manipulator. Meanwhile, at subcellular levels across countless human worlds, something flickered awake. Dormant sequences of DNA, the leftovers of that ancient meddling, began to thrum with activity. Reports filtered in, spontaneous physical enhancements, inexplicable bouts of synesthesia, uncanny mental aptitudes. These whispers of ancient design began to rise like a crescendo. This wasn't just about their past. It was about what they might yet become. Zorath had expected political wrangling to ensue, the various stellar blocks to posture and bargain over the revelation. What she hadn't anticipated was the internal combustion among her own people. The Zaltani had lived with unwavering certainty for an age. Theirs was the most advanced knowledge-gathering apparatus in the known galaxy, built over their long history of exploration and meticulous cataloguing. The vault, humanity's vault, shattered that paradigm. Suddenly, there existed entities older, wiser, and so far ahead that even comprehending their handiwork was akin to an insect attempting calculus. And if such beings shaped humanity, how did that define Xyrath's own life trajectory? Was every carefully researched hypothesis she'd ever generated worthless in the grand scheme? It was like discovering there are more dimensions to the universe than previously understood, an unsettling paradigm shift she needed time to adjust to. This existential dissonance fueled the first major schism within her species in recorded history. Those that became known as Vault Heralds fixated on deciphering the remaining records, seeking a tangible roadmap forward. Xyrath and her like-minded colleagues, while fascinated, believed they had to chart their own course. To abandon their own scientific methodology, their drive for self-driven discovery, would be tantamount to surrender. These seekers, as they called themselves, became proponents of redoubled efforts in Zaltani-centric research, determined to reclaim their position of scientific preeminence without relying on the technological cast-offs of a vanished elder race. For many years, the Vault lay largely neglected, the promise of ancient secrets outweighed by the threat it represented. Humanity bore the brunt of this shift in galactic relations. Once seen as quirky upstarts, the spectre of their unknown puppet masters hung like a pall over their heads. While some alliances strengthened out of shared uncertainty, others dissolved. Trade became fraught with suspicion. Even internally, humanity splintered. Some factions demanded more aggressive research on their newly awakened gifts, while others lobbied for caution lest they trigger unforeseen consequences or alert whoever, whatever, had manipulated them in the first place. Then, as abruptly as they awoke, the genetic changes went quiescent. The tide of heightened abilities receded, leaving only frustration in its wake. Perhaps a timed switch built into the very fabric of their being, another piece of their existence outside their control. Amidst the turmoil, one human dared to act. Dr. Isabel Martinez was not someone who would typically make the Interstellar news feeds. As a xenolinguist specializing in non-sapient communication patterns, she'd spent decades on far-flung outposts, passing the clicking courtship melodies of insectoid species and the bioluminescent distress calls of gelatinous deep-sea life. When word of the Vault's discovery and her species' dubious starring role reached her, Martinez did something utterly counterintuitive. She submitted a formal resignation. She was, perhaps politely, asked to reconsider. She flatly refused. A research grant followed from an undisclosed source, suspiciously well-timed. Then a ship, no sleek luxury transport, but an aging bulk freighter with a retrofitted lab. All under the banner of the newly founded Outreach Initiative, a one-person operation seemingly formed on either hubris or sheer madness. Her colleagues whispered the latter, while galactic security forces quietly placed her under surveillance. She had no interest in studying herself, she declared. Humans had spent far too long staring inward since the revelations. What they needed now was to look outward. Thus began Martinez's self-styled mission of reconciliation, by proxy. Travelling to worlds home to newly uncovered minor species, she focused on learning their songs, their dances, their intricate patterns others saw as primitive. To the bemusement of the locals, and sometimes even herself, she'd then offer up what she'd learned, attempting to draw parallels and open channels of communication between beings as seemingly disparate as methane-breathing mollusks and shimmering clouds of sentient spores. Martinez was mocked, occasionally pelted with off-world produce, yet persevered with the stubborn intensity of an academic obsessed. Then, the impossible happened. Her clumsy mirroring of courtship protocols opened a dialogue between two warring aquatic clans. Shared bioindicators she'd picked up elsewhere helped establish a mutually beneficial ecosystem balance between flora and fauna on a fledgling colony world. In success after success, she proved something no one thought possible. With no special gifts, no hidden abilities bequeathed by stellar meddlers, humanity could be exceptional. They could be bridge builders, intermediaries, and problem solvers on a galactic scale. Not warriors, not inheritors of godlike technology, but masters of a far more overlooked power. Genuine connection. The whispers about Dr. Martinez shifted amongst the news feeds. No longer dismissed as a fringe lunatic, there was a new label bandied about, ambassador. Not in any official capacity, that would take decades of glacial intergalactic bureaucracy to even conceptualize. But amongst the species she helped, they knew her name, they signalled it in colours and in sounds that transcended their language. The tide began to turn, ever so slowly. Humans, they realized, had something unique to offer. Not a gift handed down, but one hard-earned through millennia of clawing their way from caves to star drive. Xerath heard news of the human amongst her Zaltani colleagues, mostly derisive at first. Seeking acceptance from creatures barely emerged from the primordial swamp, preposterous. Then came a peculiar shift. In their relentless drive to uncover any vestige of ancient Vault-Maker knowledge, some amongst the heralds had inadvertently damaged a data packet. Not completely lost, the information contained hints at technology millennia away for any known race, but broken. They turned to the wider scientific community for aid, but even the most brilliant collective minds floundered. Desperation became the mother of humility. An unguarded inquiry found its way to Martinez, not for her genetic peculiarities, but for her reputation as an oddball problem solver. She pored over the damaged data with laser focus, humming softly under her breath as she worked, an old Earth children's tune. Finally, she pointed to a seemingly unrelated section of code. "Look, I'm thinking this needs another point of view. This bit here has some similarities to those Vrixian echolocation nesting patterns I looked at 5 years ago. Maybe you have the tech, but not the right mindset." Incredulity warred with the desperation of the heralds. Yet what other avenues did they have? And so a team of Zaltani researchers made their way to a swampy Vrixian backwater, armed with data files and the willingness to try the bizarre. Weeks stretched into months. Then came the day a crackle of signal announced success. The tech worked. Xerath felt her feathers stir, not with annoyance this time, but with genuine curiosity. Perhaps there was another way. This singular breakthrough proved a bridgehead, not peace, far from it, but a sliver of cooperation born from necessity. Humanity, ever adaptable, carved a niche in this new landscape. Their knack for the unconventional, the untried, made them valuable troubleshooters in ways unimaginable before the Vault discovery. Yet, like the tide, the galactic powers remained restless. The question hanging over every interaction, whispered undercurrents on every diplomatic channel, was not if, but when the architects of humanity would return. It hung over strategic summits and trade negotiations, an existential countdown against the backdrop of interstellar affairs. For some, this unknown threat spurred the largest arms race the galaxy had ever witnessed. To be caught defenseless when the Makers returned meant annihilation or enslavement. Others took a more fatalistic approach, hoarding every scrap of tech they could unearth from the Vault with wild-eyed fervour. Fear of this nebulous other had fractured the peace and balance of power so painstakingly negotiated across centuries. Then came the breakthrough from an unexpected source, not within the Vault, but deep within human biology. Years after the Vault's grand opening, one young human's genetic anomaly turned from curiosity to crisis. He began to hear things, an underlying thrum in the humdrum background of daily existence. At first, dismissed as tinnitus or early psychosis, his auditory perceptions sharpened, not in clarity, but in scope. He heard frequencies of light beyond the visible spectrum. He heard the electromagnetic whine of technology. He heard something else, a rhythmic pattern cutting through the static of existence, faint but growing stronger. It was a signal. Initially kept under wraps by governments and researchers, the whispers leaked. Was humanity a beacon for their makers? An alarm system signalling their evolutionary tinkering had borne fruit. Was this signal a summons or a death knell? What the boy-tuned radio didn't perceive was intent. There was no message, no plea for contact. It was merely an indication of being. And what's more, this signal didn't originate from outside. It came from within the known galaxy itself. Xerath found herself at the nexus of a historic crisis. Her Seeker colleagues argued the signal couldn't be connected to the ancients. There was no mention of anything resembling it in the remaining Vault data. Heralds countered that humanity might have triggered something with their newly awakened genetics, awakening a failsafe their creators placed dormant eons ago. Both sides demanded concrete answers she simply couldn't provide, but the Zaltani had the finest sensor arrays, the most powerful computation clusters. Whether she liked it or not, the task of interpreting this bizarre siren song rested with her people. Tracking the signal became the galaxy's singular obsession. Every resource was bent towards pinpointing its origin. What Xerath's arrays unveiled was a planet shrouded in enigma. No official star charts held mention of it, but it was unmistakably inhabitable. It existed on the very periphery of known space, nestled in a region long dismissed as unremarkable. Yet this world hummed with energy, not like the steady thrum of natural celestial processes, but a chaotic mix of frequencies both ancient and unsettlingly advanced. And at its core thrummed the siren call, emanating from the ground, a beacon broadcasting into the abyss. Fear gave way to a grim urgency. Plans were drafted, task forces organized. If humanity's meddling creators existed on that world, then surely this was where they resided. To ignore it was to court catastrophe, whether an immediate reckoning or a gradual takeover. This wasn't some theoretical maybe of the distant future. This was happening now, on the galaxy's doorstep. An expeditionary force was formed, not in the spirit of discovery that normally propelled a new stellar endeavour, but as a reluctant coalition bracing for confrontation. And as they drew closer, the truth was laid bare on view screens across the vast distances. The world wasn't natural. It was a construct, a vast artificial habitat of impossible scale, masked from afar by meticulously generated electromagnetic fog. Not something built in secrecy, but in plain sight, hidden by grand audacity. No race in recorded history was bold enough, advanced enough, to create something like this, or had reason to hide their magnum opus in such a way. Panic threatened to crack the tenuous veneer of cooperation. Then the signal they followed shifted, abruptly ceasing the outward broadcast. Instead, it refocused onto them, like an electronic gaze falling upon the assembled fleet. Every screen on board flashed with blinding brilliance as a signal flooded their systems, raw code cascading like gibberish upon every interface. Zerath's breath caught in her throat. They'd been found. It took days to make sense of the downloaded code, not because it was sophisticated, but because it was maddeningly simple. Like teaching a toddler arithmetic and getting back complex physics equations, there was a vast gulf in understanding that baffled every researcher across species. They had the vocabulary, but lacked the grammar of communication, raw elements they had no comprehension of fitting together. Among the chaos, patterns began to resolve. Not coordinates, as originally feared, but sequences, more of the genetic language. It appeared to target specific segments of human DNA, the sequences dormant since their awakening. It was a key, unlocking something their makers placed not into a vault, but inside humanity itself. With mounting dread, a decision was made. Volunteers were carefully chosen from across the spectrum of humanity, young and old, gifted and not, representative of every permutation their altered genome presented. This makeshift crew, burdened with expectations more vast than any space voyage, stepped into specialized capsules aboard the flagship. Each pod was a medical marvel, capable of real-time DNA monitoring and alteration. And at the core, fed by the alien signal, an interface was woven into their nervous system itself, an artificial sensory organ designed to grasp the language of beings seemingly closer to gods than galactic neighbors. One by one they slipped into the abyss of artificially altered consciousness. Outside, the world waited. Zerath's crest feathers flared with an intensity she'd only felt once before, that first alarm in the lab on Katara. For all their posturing, they were as helpless as insects against a giant's boot. It all boiled down to these fragile creatures, and a language none of them fully understood. Hours became an eternity. Finally, the first one stirred. Not in a dramatic awakening, but with slow, pained blinks. Zerath rushed to the monitoring station, her voice a brittle hiss. "What? Did you—" She trailed off, unable to voice the enormity of what was at stake. The woman, a researcher barely into her 30s, offered a wan smile. A map, her voice cracked with disuse, and directions, for fixing something. A hush fell over the command deck. No one knew what this something could be. A threat lurking just outside of perception. A broken system crucial to existence itself. What emerged in the following days was a tapestry of fragmented visions shared across the altered human volunteers. Not through words, not exactly, but in bursts of sensory impressions, emotions alien even to them. They described beings of near-limitless energy, shapers of worlds and stars, being so ancient that to them all modern species existed in the blink of an eye. And these ancients, with powers seemingly godlike, had built cracks into their own existence, not by accident or ill intent, but as a fail-safe measure. They built them into the fabric of developing species across thousands of star systems, species like humans. They left behind the means to heal themselves, should some existential rupture shatter their reality. But like an emergency broadcast sent across centuries, the original creators were long gone, the message only now coming clear. It wasn't just humans who were tinker toys, it was everything. This world, the vault, the signal, it was humanity's inheritance meant to fix a cosmos-spanning wound even their makers couldn't fully anticipate. There was an almost poetic tragedy woven into the revelation. This wasn't a summons to their grand architects, but to a funeral of sorts. Not the passing of an individual, but of the concept of singular masterminds, shaping and guiding the evolution of existence. For every vault, every manipulated planet and genetic tweak, they now understood, was a desperate act in a losing battle against the inevitable decay of everything, against entropy itself. And as one chapter slammed shut, a new one was forced open. Not one of dominance, but of stewardship, an impossible duty entrusted to fragile creatures, not because they were special, but because they were there. This shift in understanding sparked a revolution unseen in a millennium. Arguments over galactic supremacy faded, replaced by an unprecedented cooperation fueled by desperation, humility, and an ember of audacious hope. Xyrath found herself bridging the gap not just between her fragmented species, but between all, as they pooled resources and expertise. That artificial world became a hub, part scientific institute, part pilgrimage site, as those touched by alien meddling ventured inwards, guided by cryptic sensory fragments pieced together by the human explorers. And with newfound urgency, the focus shifted toward unraveling the directions. It took generations, painstaking research and experimentation born from fear and duty rather than raw curiosity. Then breakthroughs sparked across distant systems, one after another. Anomalous particles were stabilized, a decaying hyperstar brought back into safe balance, rifts that gnawed at the edge of known space slowly patched over. In acts both cosmic and microscopic, they defied the inevitable entropic collapse of the universe. In doing so, a profound philosophical change swept through star nations. No longer focused solely on survival and acquisition, but on preservation. Each species found their niche in this cosmic endeavor, humanity surprisingly excelling in the most daunting roles. With an ironic twist, their unique history allowed them to grasp the grand-scale manipulations of their stellar forebears. That tinkering left echoes in their collective gene pool, faint imprints of understanding left from the cosmic architects. Humans became adept at interpreting these remnants of intent. Each success fueled the next, like an engine slowly powering up after eons of stagnation. No, the ancients hadn't vanished out of malice or some tragic catastrophe. They'd simply run out of time, dwindling into nothingness from the relentless assault of entropy. The torch they left behind was barely smouldering, and now a motley collection of squabbling young races would determine whether it would reignite or fizzle and die, taking the very universe with it. This, then, was the legacy of humanity, not warriors, not savants, but caretakers of a vast cosmic garden, left to them by gardeners long turned to dust. This task became their myth, their legend, their driving purpose. For the first time since the vault opened, Xyrath, now impossibly old by Zaltani standards, felt a strange tranquility. They might never regain what was lost, but here, amongst the tapestry of species, humanity at the beating heart of it all. Perhaps they could prevent any further loss. That she was willing to dedicate her remaining life, and many more after, towards achieving.